Earlier, a man named Tom Boyle hoisted a Chevy Camaro, freeing a trapped cyclist in Tucson, Arizona. The events don't always involve vehicles, the writer notes, like when Lydia Angiou went toe-to-toe with a polar bear in northern Quebec to protect her son and his friends while they played hockey. Leaping over normal limits to save a life, these individuals dared what others might have thought impossible. Impossible is just a big word thrown around by small people who find it easier to live in the world they've been given than to explore the power they have to change it. So said boxer Muhammad Ali, whose indomitable spirit shone from him. Impossible is not a fact, Ali asserted. It's an opinion. Impossible is not a declaration, it's a dare. Impossible is potential. Impossible is temporary. Impossible is nothing. How does the impossible show up in your life? And how often do you take the dare? Robert Fulgham tells the story of some college students who gave each other an unusual dare to eat a chair. The students obviously were not trying to save a life. They just wanted some extra credit in their philosophy class. They could get it by doing something unique and memorable over the summer, and then exploring how it fit into their philosophy of life. So they took an unvarnished wooden chair and collected shavings off of it. By mixing the chair dust into their breakfast cereal and sprinkling it on their dinner salads, they were slowly consuming the chair. Now, if it's possible to eat a chair, surely it is possible to take on more important challenges. As the Women's March takes place in Fort Worth today, my mind turns to all those intersecting isms that limit human flourishing. Sexism, racism, classism, ageism and ableism, homophobia and transphobia, plain old poverty, and fill in the blanks for the others I've missed. In the Time for All Ages, we heard about Malala, the determined Pakistani girl, now a young woman, who uses her magical pencil to open up possibilities for girls. When she began writing about her experiences, I doubt the men in her village who tried to intimidate her into silence ever thought it possible that this little girl would become a global hero. But Malala persisted. This powerful advocate for girls' education is just getting warmed up. Closer to home, West Side member Reed Bills did something that horrified her mother and her prep school friends. As a young woman, Reed enlisted in the Air Force. Others did not consider this an option for a nice girl, but Reed didn't listen to them. It was a good choice for her. We heard about Nancy Grace Roman, another determined woman, in our Moment in UU history. A career in science was a rarity for women when Roman started, but she persisted. She followed her curiosity to the top of her field, serving as NASA's chief astronomer. We all can enjoy the images from deep space that have come to us via the Hubble telescope, which Roman was instrumental in designing and getting built. Capturing these images, too, was something that didn't seem possible until it happened. Whether a person is saving a life, eating a chair, or daring to break the rules that would hold them back, life offers us more possibilities than we realize. In the process philosophy of Alfred North Whitehead, which some folks here have been learning about recently, Whitehead acknowledges what quantum physicists have found, that even particles, these tiny units of reality whose behavior is unpredictable, have freedom. Particles have choices. Particles have possibilities. Prevalence of possibilities, according to Whitehead's metaphysics, is no accident. Rampant possibilities are a core feature of our creative universe, and we humans are no exceptions. Despite the limitations that we imagine for ourselves or that are imposed on us, vast horizons of possibilities are open to us. What's more, Whitehead concluded there is a sort of cosmic consciousness which has an evolving vision of the best of all possible worlds, and it is daring us toward that vision. Well, Whitehead uses the word lure rather than dare. We are lured toward those possibilities that are most positive for ourselves and for all reality. Poet Mary Oliver described leaving others' voices behind, and thus being able to hear a new voice, recognized as more authentic. The Bible calls it the still small voice within. Whatever you call it, this voice is luring us, daring us toward our best possibilities. If it's not drowned out by the voices of others in our ears or our memories, we can hear this call deep within ourselves. Several people shared stories with me about doing things that others might consider inadvisable, if not impossible, while following their own inner voice. Debbie dared to study with a world-renowned art quilter while she was pursuing a college degree in quilt history. Though she hadn't had an art class since 7th grade, she was surrounded by graduate-level art students and expected to exhibit her original artwork at the end of the semester, the same as the others. The rewards have been phenomenal, Debbie says. You can look around at some of the art quilts in this church, which are her handiwork, and see that for yourself. Amanda started a business. Lots of people do that, and about half of small businesses make it to 5 years. What made Amanda more daring was that she was in college when she started hers. She'd had only one business class and tried freelancing in a field where that was unheard of at the time, as a paralegal. 8 years later, she's still going strong. Not long after 9/11, Janelle moved to New York City. She had a few $100s, no job lined up, and she got lots of messages that it would be impossible to live in the Big Apple. She would not make it. She went anyway. She soon found a job and a place to live and had 4 good years there that boosted her career. Janelle has never regretted taking the chance. Several people spoke of adopting a child, including Cindy. I was ready to be a mom, she says, but not married and not in a serious relationship. It had not really occurred to me that I could adopt. A newspaper blurb and a seminar showed her it was possible for her to become a parent on her own, and Cindy went for it. Her son Zach is now a young adult, and they're still close. Then there's Ahmed. In the middle of a personal storm, he dared what others told him was impossible, a PhD. Ahmed says, I was told things such as, you are not PhD material. It's not in your genes. You don't have what it takes. While on medical leave from work in unusual circumstances, he had to drop out of the PhD program. Then his wife divorced him, taking their daughter with her. I went back to school, Ahmed says, to get the one thing that the world told me that I can't have, the PhD. And he didn't just get it. For his research, he was featured as one of the Fast Company most creative people, along with the CEO of Ford and other accomplished people. Ahmed surely takes some satisfaction in the response he gets today from the university folks who once told him he couldn't cut it. Professors brag about his having been their student, and the university features him in his research to attract new students. The library reported that his dissertation was the #1 download of all time. I asked Ahmed why he persisted despite others' discouragement. I believed in it so strongly, no matter what others told me, he says. I knew I had something to offer the world. Plus, he shared, after he and his wife split, he wanted his daughter to be proud of him. Ahmed heard his own inner voice and was determined to save his own life. Ruth Bader Ginsburg dared to dream big. Like Ahmed, Ginsburg was stymied early in her career. She got through law school with flying colors, starting at Harvard and graduating first in her class from Columbia. Judges should have been thrilled at the prospect of her clerking for them, but this was 1959, and a woman, even one as bright and as focused as Ginsburg, did not interest most of them. One of her professors had to press for a clerkship, even promising to replace her if she proved insufficient in order to get her a placement. Next, when she started work in research and teaching, she was one of only 20 female law professors in the country. And she was told she was paid less than her male counterparts because her husband had a well-paying job. If the movie recently inspired by her life in theaters now is to be believed, she fired up her students' hunger for justice during the counterculture of the 60s and 70s, equipping them to be the kind of legal changemakers that she had aspired to be herself. Meanwhile, at home, she and husband Marty raised 2 children as equal partners and balanced their 2 legal careers. Happy to join Ruth in defying gender norms, Marty did most of the cooking. Ruth was not yet doing the work she dared to do, but she persisted. She believed another world was possible. Mahatma Gandhi believed that too. He believed that India could be free of British rule. What's more, he believed in the possibility that principled nonviolence, satyagraha in Sanskrit, translated variously as truth force or soul force, could transform not just India, but the whole world. Stephanie Van Hook of the Metta Center for Nonviolence lifts up the daring question that fueled Gandhi's life. What would happen if I experimented with love on as large and as vast a scale as possible? Now, it may be counterintuitive, but he actually started on the smallest of human scales, with himself. Following the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, which he called his mother, Gandhi sought to reduce himself to zero, to remove all self-will or selfish ego from his personality. This allowed him to become the Great One, or Mahatma, who showed the power of soul force to the whole world. Not only did Gandhi and the movement around him free India from the British without firing a single shot, they inspired countless other movements to use what he called the science of nonviolence. You may know that Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the most visible leaders in our nation to study Gandhi and to operate in a faithful and disciplined way according to the principles of soul force, in King's case, within his own Christian tradition. As we remember King's legacy on MLK Day tomorrow, I believe the best way of honoring that legacy is to put soul force into action for those injustices that still haunt our nation and our world. The triple evils of poverty, racism, and militarism that King worked against. And those things that lure each one of us to help create the better world that is possible. I bet many change makers could see themselves in one of my favorite quotes from Gandhi about social change. He said, "First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win." Ruth Bader Ginsburg certainly knows about being ignored, and she knows about winning, too. While Ginsburg continued teaching law students in the classroom, she still heard that voice within, calling her to be in the courtroom, too. In the early 70s, she established what became the Women's Rights Project under the auspices of the American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU. It wasn't easy to convince the ACLU's legal head, Mel Wolfe, that now was the time for this work, and that she was the one to lead it. When she pitched the first case to him, he tried to talk her out of pursuing it. Then he suggested that her charming husband, Marty, should be the one to present the case in court, rather than Ruth. Here's how part of the exchange is portrayed in the movie inspired by Ginsburg's life. ACLU legal director Mel Wolfe says, "You will lose, and when you do, you will set the women's movement back 10 years. Ruth Bader Ginsburg replies, "You don't get to tell me when to quit." Basically, when Ginsburg decided it was time for her to start taking cases to court to challenge sex discrimination, others told her it was impossible. Then she went ahead and did it, and she won. Before her ascension to the federal bench and then the Supreme Court, for 8 years, she worked to systematically empower women, and for that matter, men, by releasing the restrictions on gender roles that were encoded in our laws. Ginsburg was well aware of the shoulders she stood on, the women who had worked to advance women's standing in the eyes of the law before her. Likewise, everyone marching today and everyone working in concrete ways for gender equality should recognize that today's momentum builds on Ginsburg's visionary work and those before her. So much more is possible for human beings than we often recognize. Remember those people who lift cars off a loved one or a stranger? It turns out there are 2 reasons the seemingly impossible feat truly happens. One, says the BBC article, is that the task is not as hard as it seems. The weight you are lifting when you pick up one corner or the front end of a car is not as heavy as we think. It's not like lifting the entire car off the ground. Gandhi and Ginsburg and Malala and all the other heroes also lifted just one corner at a time. They knew they did not have to lift all the weight of the issues they worked on in a single moment. Each step along the way is doable. The second reason we can do impossible things is that we are stronger than we realize. The BBC writer notes, even when we feel we are at our limit, we most certainly are not. Most of us use only 60% of our muscle mass in the most strenuous workout. For elite athletes, it's closer to 80%. The margin that is there for safety means that, in most cases, we could do more without incurring injury. It isn't even our real physical limitations that stop us from doing more. According to the BBC article, our brain, rather than our body, largely says when it's time to quit, based on our psychology. Now, interestingly, our pain sensitivity falls in stressful, adrenaline-filled situations, which allows the bystander to lift a car to save another's life, even though they may well do real muscle damage. The Arizona man who lifted a car off a teenager reportedly noticed after he got home that he felt a pain in his mouth. He had apparently clenched his jaw so hard during the intense lift that he cracked 8 teeth. So when we translate this physical feat into the arena of social change, we can remember this cautionary tale and not give so much of ourselves in any one campaign or effort that we injure our own well-being. Still, it is encouraging to know that our capacity is much greater than our daily living would suggest. In one study of physical strength, strength went up by 10% after participants merely heard the sound of a starter pistol adrenaline. Reportedly, shouting or grunting by the participants unlocked 15% more strength, and hypnosis, an amazing 30%. So whatever the deep voice within you is calling you to do, to live into the best possibilities of your own life, perhaps even to change the world, it's probably more doable than you think, and you are likely stronger than you realize. Now, in case you are tempted to try eating a chair, I'll share a little tip from the students who dared it. Add some cinnamon or lemon pepper, and you'll hardly notice the woody taste. I haven't tried it, so I can't vouch for it personally. Let each of us trust the voice deep within that dares us to do the impossible. May it be so. Amen.